welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm absolutely honoured today to be joined by the amazing Nigel Shaw. Nigel's a composer, musician, amazing performer, and instrument maker. Hi, Nigel, welcome.
Hello there, Ian. It's so lovely to see you, and I'm wonderful to reconnect after all these years
Yes,
of being apart from people that we care about. So lovely to be able to have this conversation. Thank you.
there's so many aspects to the work you do. If you could explain a little bit about where you live and your environment, because I know that that's had a massive influence on all of your creativity.
I live on a place called Dartmoor, which is a national park in the southwest of England, and it's an extraordinary series of hills and deep valleys and waterfalls and ancient oak forests and a lot of ancient sacred sites from many thousands of years ago. It's one of the richest places in the whole of Europe for undisturbed sacred sites of stone circles and things. So Dartmoor is my home, and I live in a small hill farm right up at the top. We're over 1,000 feet here, and unusually for England, it feels very undisturbed by humanity here, whereas most of England is very tamed. It's a landscape that's for many years, thousands of years, has been suppressed, but there's still a wildness on Dartmoor. It feels like the veils. I like to describe it like the veils feel very thin between the past and now and the future. So it's an incredibly inspiring place for me, and really sort of, although my music journey had started in London many years before, it was contact with Dartmoor and then moving to live here that was just this extraordinary outpouring of music that was to do with playing music about the land. And that stayed with me ever since, really. Everything I do really is based on our planet and on our landscapes. Obviously, for me, particularly my home landscape, which every day I walk on it inspires another piece of music.
Yes, yes. I remember, as I was driving through Dartmoor, especially those, forests and beautiful rivers. And I remember thinking, this is why Nigel's music sounds like it does. It was like you just embodied your surroundings so perfectly. It felt like.
Well, there's a really interesting story about this. I mean, I was a musician working in London. I'd played in some bands, but I'd also started to create my own personal music, which was this more ambient and reflective type of music that I naturally went to. And I lived in various flats and stuff, and London's a busy city and noisy and smelly and everything like that. And when I was from the age of 0 to 12 years old, I think my family always used to bring me and my sister down to Dartmoor, and we stayed on a farm.
Right.
And I just remember I completely falling in love with it, particularly the rivers. The rivers had this extraordinary effect on me, just the beautiful clarity of the water, the sound,
Mm.
looking through the water like there's another world in that. And the hill streams on Dartmoor are a sort of amber colour, like a good whiskey,
Yeah, yeah.
and so they have this beautiful sort of colour and reflection. So those memories stayed with me, and when I reached my late teens and early 20s, I used to sort of pilgrimage to Dartmoor
Mm.
and camp out in the wild for weeks on end,
Oh, wow.
just
Wow.
completely filling me.
Yeah.
As I started to do music, I suddenly thought that what I needed, and this was a purely personal thing, was to have Dartmoor with me
Mm.
when I was in London as a kind of protective bubble.
Yeah.
And now I know that lots of people, do this now, and it's become quite a commonly known thing to use natural sounds in recordings.
Mm.
But it hadn't really been done that often, and that wasn't the original intent either. I borrowed some microphones, very expensive microphones, from a friend who worked for the BBC, and
Oh,
I
wow.
came down to Dartmoor and I recorded the natural sounds, mainly the rivers, but also the bird song and the forest environment. And then I would move on to Cornwall and record the oceans
Mm.
and
Mm.
well, the seashore really.
Mm. Mm.
And I remember standing in the water with these extraordinarily expensive microphones, hoping that I didn't fall over, because my friend would never have forgiven me if I
Yeah.
had lost these BBC microphones.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I brought these sounds back, and I used to literally put them on in my flat and just play them, and
Right.
it would block out the sounds of the car alarms, and even I lived above a kebab shop, so the smell of the kebab shop started to fade away, and I could smell the leaf mold
Yeah.
of the forest, and the ocean ozone smell of. Um,
Yeah.
and then I started working with the ocean sounds and did an album called The Seventh Wave while I was in London. It was the last piece of work I did in London,
Mm.
and it was just a free improvisation for half an hour for each part, half an hour continuous free improvisation over the
Wow.
top of the beautiful ocean sounds.
That's quite a
And
feat.
that was the album. It was just almost instant.
Mm.
Um, when I made my move to Dartmoor, I'd been trying for years, convincing friends and various people to move with me, and none of them wanted to come.
Yeah.
So why do we want to live there?
Yeah.
Um, I just went. I just went for it.
Good on you.
And a lot of that was because I'd met my partner, my wife, Carolyn Hillier, who had the same vision of moving to Dartmoor.
Wow.
So together we helped each other do it.
Yes.
And when I first arrived on Dartmoor, before I managed to find a place with Carolyn, I rented a small sort of converted barn on the edge of the moor from this farmer. And I was there for 4 months. And in that 4 months, I did the album, The River.
Ah.
And The River was such an important recording, because it was like
Mm.
I had these sounds from Dartmoor, I'd taken them to London, I'd come back to Dartmoor, and then I started working with these sounds. And when I hear the music now, although I feel like I've moved on musically, there's a joy to that
Mm. It's a
music,
classic. It's a classic
and
album.
it still seems to, lots of people seem to really really love this work. But when I hear it, all I remember is the joy. I'm home. I've got here.
Yeah.
I've made it after all these years, and
Wonderful.
I can't ever forget that feeling of
Yeah.
working on this music, but living on Dartmoor. It was
Yeah.
extraordinary.
It's very special. And again, it takes us back to Dartmoor when we listen to it as well. So, it's music is amazing like that, isn't it? The way it can transport us to all sorts of places with our, mental association with where it comes
Well, I
from.
think as a musician working with natural sounds, I think when you're a musician, you kind of want to fill in the spaces. That's our job, isn't it, of creating sound within an empty space.
Mm.
But one of the problems that we have is trying to fill that space too much. Of layering too many things, too many layers, too many notes within that space.
Yes.
I mean, that can be brilliant if you want a different type of music. The sort of tempo and pacing and everything can make wonderful music. But to create that sort of feeling of stillness, it's the hardest bit is to take out the things that we're working on, because we love all the notes we're playing and we want them all to be in there.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about the natural sounds is that they create the backdrop. You don't need to fill all the spaces. And I'm sure it may seem very obvious, but it just meant that you could wait and let whatever note that felt it was really important come, rather than trying to fill an empty space. And I've come back to this way of using these sounds several times over the years. There was an album called Dartmoor Journey, which followed the Dart River, which is what Dartmoor's named after, the River Dart. And it above our farm here is the source of it, and it flows down over the moor and then down into these deep valleys. So I started right on the very tops of the hills,
Nice.
trying to record the sounds of the wind through the reeds, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because it's just the wind in the end, which is not a sound that sounds great on a microphone sometimes.
Yeah.
But all the way down, follow that river journey all the way down into the deep oak valleys. So that was another journey. And more recently, an album called Flow, which was really a callback to the river, of just saying, 25 years on at the time that it was written, how am I different? How have I changed? What's my relationship now with this land?
Yes.
So it's kind of like it's been a repeating callback.
Beautiful.
To go to these beautiful places.
Yeah. there's an amazing profoundness in your music, and I'm sure it's been incredibly healing for people to listen to over the years. But there's the stillness of you, I think, really comes through beautifully in the music as well. It's not just the your environment, but I feel like it's very much you, and who you are, and your soul's really imprinting beautifully into the music as well. And so I think it's
Oh,
it's a real credit to you that you're able to kind of access that incredible stillness, and there's a wisdom in the music.
well, thank you. I mean, for me, I always look at it that I'm a terrible disciplinarian. I'm terrible at practicing things. Um, I'm terrible at meditation. People say, "Oh, you must meditate for hours," and I have so little discipline in doing this.
Me too.
But what I do is yeah, I think that people often don't expect that answer because they listen to the music and say, "Oh, you must." But actually, that's not true. The time that it happens for me is when I'm on the land, and then everything slows, everything kind of moves into a totally different time scale. And the other time is when I'm actually playing an instrument. So
Yes, yes.
for me, playing the instruments is totally my meditation, and it reaches a
Mm.
part for me where I am literally in no time. I'm in
Yeah,
no
yeah.
place. I become completely detached from anything in my physical realm that I'm in. And
Beautiful.
it's such a lovely space. And I know people can achieve that through, maybe more disciplined people can achieve that sitting in a room. But for me, it takes those things to be able to do it.
I think music is a brilliant meditation. Um, I've can relate to what you've just said perfectly well, and I've used playing guitar as my form of meditation since I started playing when I was about 10. So for a
Yeah,
very long time now. But it's just, you're and going into that alpha state, and time slows down, and
yeah.
everything just finds its own natural stillness. And yeah, so I can totally relate to what you're saying.
I mean, for me, it's like to be able to play music is just the greatest honor to be able to be doing this because, it wasn't anything to do with my background. My background was not doing, I was never trained as a musician. So every time I find myself sort of standing on a stage in front of people or, recording an album or doing these things, I always kind of like almost like pinching myself to go, how did this happen? It's like, it's like a dream state
Yeah,
nearly
yeah,
the whole
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And it's not just playing music. It is about communication and the fact that people
Yes.
talk to me about the music or come and ask me about things or listen to it or comment on it. And that opens up this amazing human to human
Mm,
thing about ourselves and what we
mm.
feel about the land or about all these complex and beautiful things that we have as humans, and totally unexpected. I mean, I was probably the most least likely person to be when I was younger to be doing this kind of
Really?
thing. Um,
Wow.
but so I feel it's like it was a constant everyday feeling of gratitude of kind of
Yes.
going, well, how did this happen? How did I get to this
Yeah.
place?
So sounds like a wonderful journey. How much of it was the natural environment, and how much of it for you, inspiration wise, is it just merely having the intention to focus on composing?
Well, it depends on what type of work I'm doing, I think,
Yeah,
really, because
yeah.
I mean, I kind of have two ways at which I approach
Okay.
creating things. One of them, I was talking about the river and the seventh wave and these albums of improvisation where, you literally run the tape, as it were,
Yeah.
and just play. And
Hmm.
sometimes everything you play you can immediately get rid of,
Hmm.
and other times you just think, I don't even know where that came from. I don't know.
Right.
I've never done that before. I've never played like that before. The other side of the work is much more, if you want to say, work, which is the composition side.
Hmm.
and there's quite a few albums I've done where I've literally worked every single part out note by note,
All right.
and structured everything, the layers. It is a very different part of your body and brain that works in creating music like that, but it's equally as enjoyable because it's like you have a puzzle to solve, and
Yes,
you are sure there's some answer, even though you don't know what it is. But you have these sort of building blocks, and you have different ways of working. And I like to do both. I wouldn't find the fullest enjoyment of doing just one of those things.
Yeah.
It sort of came to a head when quite a few years ago when I did an album called Dartmoor. I did a whole series of Dartmoor-based albums, and I did one called Dartmoor Symphony, which is working with an orchestra.
Oh wow!
And a classical orchestra, string sections specifically. Yeah. So basically, I wrote all the parts and worked out a sort of orchestration for it. But I have no musical. I can't read a single note of music.
Oh, so how did you do that?
Well, first of all, I booked a recording session with a local professional chamber orchestra.
Beautiful, yeah.
And I talked to the conductor, and he said, "Well, obviously we'll need all the sheet." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I understand that." So the program, the software I work on, can show everything as in a stave. So without any of my knowledge, I could, as a MIDI input, it can turn it into sheet music. So I printed those things out and I handed them out at the first session. And of course, they were just totally illegible for an orchestra because although it does have the notes, it doesn't have any of the direction or very little of the important information the orchestra needs. And of course, I don't understand the language, so I couldn't interpret it. So when I started to approach the next sessions, which were looming up really quickly, I came and went to Kevin Kendall. So Kevin can read and he can transcribe music. So I sent him I sent him the staves, but I also sent him my recordings of everything done on the keyboard and with my approximation of what it was. And then he went, "Oh, I understand what he's trying to do." And he produced these beautiful pieces of sheet music, which when they then played that, sounded like what I wanted it to sound like.
Wow. My goodness.
So thanks again to Kevin. And but the thing is that it was terrifying, to be honest. I mean, obviously, the to work outside like a fish out of water. There's a wonderful bit where I was sort of, I think it was the second session, and we'd changed from recording here, which is a very small space. My recording studio is beautiful, but it's not really big enough for everybody. And we went to this beautiful wooden yoga studio room, which sounded amazing. And we'd started doing the work, and this, I think it was one of the cellists came up to me and said, So Nigel, this bit of cello you've got written here, you've got it written down that it's like in these quavers, but it feels like we should be doing crotchets really. And I went, I had no idea what she was talking about. I didn't even know what. I didn't even looking at the sheet. I didn't even know what bar it was of the music. And I just went, "Yeah, no, I think you're probably right," and bluffed my way through.
Fantastic.
The very lucky thing is that this beautiful orchestra, small orchestra, was led by a violinist called Malcolm Latcham. Now, Malcolm Latcham, I didn't really know much about him. I knew he was a very old man, and he was a lovely man. But he set up with Sir Neville Marriner, a very famous conductor of classical music in London, the Academy of St Martin's in the Field, one of the most famous professional academies in the whole of the UK. And he'd retired to the southwest and joined this orchestra. So, and he was amazing with me because he was so kind, and he came up to me and he would go, "What you're writing here, Nigel, is really beautiful," he said, "but when you've got this bit here, this bit of violin, we could play it like this, or we could play it like that." And what he was very gently doing, with my lack of knowledge about how these instruments really worked in a purely physical way, was showing me very gently there might be another way to do it. And after, I think this happened about 2 or 3 times, and after that I said, "You know what, Malcolm?" I said, anything you see in this score that you think could be better done with a slight change of the action of the bow or any of these things, just do it. I totally trust you. So it's thanks to him that a lot of it sounded the way it did. But it was an amazing experience, and to hear, it's the only time I've heard my music being played back to me by anybody else.
How wonderful.
It is an unusual experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it must have sounded very rich.
It was just magic. I mean, it was like a dream thing. So
you must have had goosebumps listening back to that.
It was very, very amazing, and thanks to them, I mean, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. We did actually. I've performed with this orchestra twice, playing some pieces from this.
Oh, fantastic!
And the first one, I'm usually quite calm at gigs. I've been playing music live for 30, 40 years nearly. And I'm kind of reasonably relaxed about playing even in difficult circumstances. I kind of just go, okay, it's everything's going to be okay. But with the orchestra, it was utterly terrifying.
Yeah, I bet.
Because we didn't get enough time to rehearse, because orchestras are very expensive.
Yeah.
So you don't get a lot of it, really expensive.
Yes.
And so there wasn't much rehearsal time. And in the rehearsal, they'd never played the pieces correctly all the way through.
Oh, wow.
So by the time we came to the live performance, I'd never heard them actually manage to play.
Oh, gosh.
The pieces.
Wow.
And I'd never been conducted before, because I was being conducted by a conductor.
Yeah, how weird for you.
I just after the first one, I went, I'm never doing that again.
Wow.
I mean, it was amazing to do, but I wanted to knock my heart rate.
Yeah.
But I did do it a second time.
Yeah.
And we had time to rehearse, and it was absolutely wonderful. I loved it. The second time, I kind of knew what was going on, and it was really beautiful. And I just, what an honor, what a joy to sit in a string section and play.
Yeah.
The
richness of it must have been mind-blowing, and what a wonderful memory for you to have.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, because I realized that live performance is a huge part of what you do, isn't it?
I think it's probably it's my favorite.
Is it?
Place to be. I mean, I love recording. I love the process of recording. I love the sort of ups and downs of it all, of creating something. But when you're standing there and it's happening in that moment. Those sounds, those people, that energy exchange that's happening, that space you're playing in. It's just beautiful. There's nothing. It's a hard thing to describe. Because it's not about a performance. I'm not sort of standing on one leg and going, look at me, look at me. It's just the sound of being able to create that sound in a live environment, and the fact that particularly with the more improvised pieces. I mean, in fact, I pretty much, because I can't remember most of the things I play, it's all improvised in that way.
Yeah.
That's a one in the moment. That's a one-off, one moment set of notes, never ever to be repeated ever. It's utterly unique
in the moment
thing, and I love that. That's just,
that's powerful, isn't it? And that beautiful two-way exchange with you to the audience and their appreciation back. That must be a very powerful feeling as well.
I mean, you know this from performance things. There's a special magic that happens in those things, and it doesn't. Sometimes you come away thinking, I could have played better, or I could have done that, but every single one, there's some level of celebration. Even with some of them, I mean, I play a lot of music festivals, and they're often chaotic, and the sound is terrible, and it's chaos, and there's background noise, and it's far from a peaceful kind of thing. But they all have something amazing that happens in them.
You also have your band Global, which is very different.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm. I will listen to any music. I find something in almost any music that I've heard in any genre. I can find something that I find amazing and beautiful, or that affects me in some way. I think with the Global it started off as like a dance project, back in the 90s
Yeah.
with a fellow synthesizer player. And I think what I found was that you could find the same amazing deep points in dance music as you could in completely ambient, almost empty, sort of much more gentle pieces. And you could almost have the same sounds layered over either over the loads of beautiful waterfall sounds, and if you put the same sounds over some amazing beats and heavy bass stuff, it still sounded great.
Yeah, cool.
So it was kind of like, it was a wonderful finding a sort of genre of music where I could actually find that both of them worked.
Yes.
I mean, my background actually is the synthesizers. I mean,
Yes.
my first instrument was a synthesizer,
Right.
and I was a student with no musical ability and no lead up to music at all, and I started to study biology, and I'd done very badly in my exams, so I was at a technical college, and I was surprised to receive a student grant.
Right.
And what should you do with a student grant? Well, a lot of friends went and drank a lot, and used their student grant for that. I went and bought a synthesizer, a very expensive synthesizer.
Perfect.
I didn't know what I was doing, and then you'd come around to the house and they'd say, "Well, look, there's no food in your fridge, but you've got a synthesizer on the table. What are you going to do with it?" And I think that I have still no idea what I was doing. I don't know why I did it. I just knew intrinsically that there was something within this instrument. I'd always loved them because of the thing about the synthesizers, and a lot of people kind of have different views on electronic music. But for me, the palette of sound is indefinite. It literally has no end.
Yeah.
For someone who couldn't play a single note of anything on any instrument of any kind, to be able to place one finger on the synthesizer and create an entire world, was exactly what I needed. I needed something to gently pull me into music and to encourage me to play and to focus on the sound, not the technique. Not how many notes can I play, but what sound am I actually making when I'm playing those notes. And for years, I mean, all my early music was written on synthesizers.
Yeah.
And I still today, there's such a huge part of the music I use, even on the gentle music. I mean, and to take a point, I was in a conversation a couple of years ago, and I played a piece from this album Flow, which was quite a recent recording. Lots of beautiful flutes, piano, and people were saying, "Oh, it must take ages to record those flutes and that piano." And I said, "No, they're really quick. They're like a few weeks' work." I said the months and months and months of work that happened before that were all the layers in the background that are you can't really even notice them as an individual sound, but they are a texture everything else sits into.
Yeah, right.
And they're all created on synthesizers.
Yeah.
And it's like people were a bit shocked when I said it. I said, no, that's where the work is.
Yeah.
Is creating a beautiful environment for all this music to sit in.
That's amazing. Amazing.
So,
but it just has to be the right support for that, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And those subtleties and yeah, that's amazing.
So the dance music, has been, as just another part of that. And in fact, this summer, I've just spent probably half of the gigs I did this summer were playing with Global again. Cool. We're all older chaps now. We're all getting on a bit.
Wonderful.
But we played lots of festivals like Glastonbury Festival, and quite famous big festivals and some smaller ones as well. And playing this music, it has I work with a didge player. The didge is obviously just such an incredible bass instrument, and the way it holds the rhythms and stuff, and a guitarist and a percussionist. And another keyboard player sometimes. So it's a lovely group of people to work with. Yeah. And then the joy of watching, the whole room bouncing up and down is another whole set of lovely experiences.
Yeah. I know that you're very passionate about music being a very inclusive thing for anyone.
I was doing lots of concerts and over in the early days and right the way through, and people would come up sometimes after the concert and say things like, "It must be so wonderful to be musical." That was quite a common thing. Oh, it must be so lovely to be able to play music. I'd love to be able to play music, but I'm not musical. So this was really common. You know, it was surprising. Almost every gig there would probably be someone saying something along those lines. And I really thought about that because I was not considered musical when I was young. Um, I mean, there's a wonderful story about my only childhood music experience. I mean, I have some music background in my family, but not sort of particularly full one. But when I was 9 years old, I went to this secondary school, and I thought I'd love to play guitar. And I
Yeah,
said to my
cool.
mum and dad, I'd love to play guitar, and they bought me like a cheap classical guitar, like child's guitar,
Yeah.
and they had lessons at school. So I went into the school and I took my guitar and I had my first lesson, and he showed me some of the notes and stuff, and it was kind of picking style of playing. And he gave me some sheet music, which obviously I couldn't understand. And anyway, so I went home and I played a lot. I loved it. I absolutely fell in love with this little instrument. I was like fiddling with it all the time. So I went back in for the second lesson, and the lessons were quite difficult, but they were, it was okay. He was showing me some things. The third time, so okay, third time, this is 3 weeks in. I went in at the end of the lesson. The teacher turned to me and he said, "Well, I don't think there's any point in you coming back, really, is there?"
Really?
And I was like, "What? What?" He
What?
said, "Well, you're obviously not going to have any talent at this, so
Really?
why are you wasting our time
Oh
coming in
no.
and doing
Oh,
this, doing play?" And I was so upset because I was like, "But I'm just really having fun."
that's
But
bizarre.
but this guy was expecting me. It was an indication of the sort of school it was, that I
Yes.
wasn't immediately some child prodigy at this instrument, and that I would never become a virtuoso guitar player. He wasn't interested. It was
Wow.
extraordinary. So that's quite extreme, but
Yeah.
it actually also tells a
Mm,
lot about most of ours as children, our experience of music. So
mm,
when children first approach music, they're given a little whistle or a drum when they're a little baby, and they smash it around and they bang it and they beat it or they scream in it or they do whatever they're doing. Or modern things that they have sort of
yeah.
programs where they sing with a computer, and all these different types of things. And music is a joy. It's
Yeah.
laughter. It's fun. It's just a complete release of energy, and children understand this.
Yeah.
They naturally have no fear about what noise they're making. They just make a noise,
Yeah.
and it's wonderful to watch. What happens is we start to teach music. I mean, I'm not saying this in every culture, but certainly in European style cultures, we start to try and teach excellence in music.
Mm,
And we,
mm.
we do that in two ways. We give our children instruments that are very, very loud and are almost impossible to play, even
Mm, mm.
without years of training to get
Yes.
any decent sound out of. So,
Yeah,
like
right.
they're given violins. I mean, you can't make a violin sound nice for years, unless
Mm.
you're some kind of natural aptitude.
Yeah.
Piano. It's a very complicated instrument. That it can be very discordant unless you learn it. It takes
Mm,
a lot of learning before you get to a good stage. Guitars maybe a little bit easier to get at least something happening, but
mm,
it's still a difficult technique.
mm.
And then we're given recorders, which, although they're quite simple, sound horrendous most of the time, particularly the plastic ones. They're so loud.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
These are orchestral instruments. They're made to be played in huge halls.
Mm,
So the other thing that we notice is that when we're exploring, we don't really want people to listen to us exploring,
mm,
because
mm,
we're starting to learn a bit of fear about expressing ourselves. We're being
mm,
told not to be noisy. We're being told not to express ourselves.
mm,
Keep quiet. Don't do that.
mm,
So
mm,
that gets coupled with the music.
mm.
And so basically, most people play a bit of recorder or they play on a piano a bit, and then they never play a musical instrument ever again.
Mm.
That's the end of their whole music. And they're the people that come up and tell me that they're not musical.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Every single human being is musical.
Yes.
We are all musical beings. We can't not be, because we're human beings.
Yeah, exactly.
And in ancient cultures, in many different tribal cultures, there isn't a word for musician.
Oh,
There
really?
just isn't one. There just
Yeah,
isn't one.
right.
Because, you don't distinguish between a musician and a human.
No, yeah, the
It's
word's
like they can't
human.
exist as a separate. It's like it's just like there's no separation
Yeah,
for it
how
being a kind of.
interesting.
So this is something we've lost
Yeah.
our ability to just have music in our lives as something that we're not trying to be better than anyone else. Music in Western cultures is competitive music. It's
Mm,
actually competitive.
mm,
All the
mm,
TV shows, talent shows,
mm,
excellent shows, they're all about judgment. So
mm.
they're better than they are,
Yeah,
or what? Oh, I like them, but I don't like them. There's this sort of way of looking at music as being good and bad, or
mm,
right and wrong,
yeah,
or people being good and other people not being good.
yeah,
And
yeah,
standing on a stage where you're elevated above other people, it's
yeah.
all part of our attitude
Mm.
towards music. So I realized, I mean, one of the first things I thought is if I can make a living from playing music, then anyone can, because it's like, I'm not supremely talented as a physically as a player. I just, for some reason, didn't seem to have the fear
There's,
of
yeah, I
expressing it.
we were talking about this recently, weren't we, about virtuosity, and I think there's different types of virtuosity, and sure, virtuosity has its place, but I think there's lots of aspects to virtuosity, and it's even recognizing. I think a lot of virtuosity is in the subtleties of the playing. And I was talking to Piers Adams, who is a recorder virtuoso, and he
Mm,
was talking about that these days his mastery is exploring just the subtlest of breathing techniques, and just
yeah,
diving into a subatomic level of brilliance in the playing, and you go, yes, that it becomes a physical virtuosity, but then this other layer of I guess wisdom in the music, uh, descends, and it becomes
yeah.
special on another level again, and then it starts again and never ends, does it? Mastery.
I love listening to incredible players
Mm,
of any instrument. I mean, it's incredible to watch, isn't it?
yeah.
Their command, their ability, and if people want to dedicate, every hour of their life to becoming excellent at one particular instrument, I think it's extraordinary
Mm,
to dedicate. I mean, obviously, that is also true of ancient cultures. Is there were people who did that.
yeah.
There's some cultures that still exist today. Like the shakuhachi, for example, in Japan, where
Mm,
so
mm.
it's years and years of very specialist training and studying to play one note.
Yeah.
This kind of way of looking at music.
Yes.
But I think as a tribal thing,
Mm,
music should be accessible to
mm,
every single person, and we need to relearn a way of letting our children have this back, this gift
mm,
to be a musical creature, a musical being. And I
mm.
do feel that one of the ways is to go back to ancient instruments, because the thing about the ancient instruments is that not all of them, but many of them were very easy to play. They were often quite quiet, so they
Mm.
weren't made to play with vast volume.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so the learning process is gentler on you when
Yes.
you're learning to play an instrument. If it's quieter, it's easier
Mm,
for
mm.
most people. And
Yeah.
and to teach in a different way, where we teach about tonality and
Yeah.
intent and joy. I mean, if you look at the actual terminology that we use in our language, is that we play music, play
Mm. Play. Yeah.
in the word. We don't work music.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not. When I go and perform, I'm not working music. I'm playing music.
Yeah. Great point.
It's everything is in the word.
Yeah.
It should be a joyful, uplifting, wonderful experience. There's work involved, but when you come to do it, it's
Yeah.
just a joyful expression. So
That's
I've got a bit
wonderful.
evangelical. I got a bit evangelical about this, and a bit kind of obsessed with kind of. But I do feel it's important, because I felt sadness when people told me they
Mm.
weren't musical.
Yeah.
I have some instruments some flutes that basically I know everyone can play, and not just play, but they will sound exactly the same as when I play them.
Oh,
So
cool.
they've
Yeah.
been listening to me play, and they think, oh, he's great. He's been playing for years. He must be really good at it. So basically, I have something that I will play it,
Yeah.
and then they will play it, and it will not sound any different. And they will go, well, I sound
Wow.
exactly like you do. And I go, I know.
Well, that
It's
must be
just that
very
you just
powerful.
needed, yeah, because you just need the tool,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right tool to help you with the job. And the job is, to begin with, showing that it's not about, how special I am. It's about how special you are, and about how special every individual is at expressing something in themselves
Yeah.
in terms of music.
Does it blow
Um,
them away when they?
Yeah, a lot of people are quite surprised. I mean, I like to term it the fact of people say, I sort of say, "Can you play music?" They go, "No." I said, and then I say, "Okay, here's another question: Are you alive? Are you actually breathing? Is the breath coming out of your body?" And they
Yeah.
go, "Yes." So, okay, well, and then you can play this instrument because it's a wind instrument, and if you've got air in your lungs, you can make it make a sound,
Wonderful.
and then they do, and
Wow.
it's wonderful. It's lovely. It's like their faces
Wow.
are like, you know,
Yeah. That's so
I'm
good.
alive.
Yeah. That's amazing. So the flute is a massive part of your musical life.
Yeah,
And I know you've since gone on to make them yourself, which I'd love to talk to you about in just a
yeah,
sec. But I just going back a little bit, you started with your synthesizer, and how soon did you think flute? I've got to explore, handmade flutes, and at what point did they become a big part of your sound? Because that's quite a thing, isn't it? To go from the wonderland of synthesizers and what
yeah, yeah,
they're the palette that they're capable of, to it's again, it's the other end of the spectrum where you're coming to that incredible purity of
yeah.
tone. So it's that an amazing end of the spectrum that you've explored. So did that come in quite early in the piece, the realization that the flute?
Yeah. I mean, I think I always had that sound in my head, because even when I was playing the synthesizers, I mean, fairly early on in my career of playing synthesizers, they brought out samplers. So
Mm,
this wonderful technique of being able to record sounds and then play them back on a keyboard,
mm,
with the advent of computers and music and stuff. And I loved sample. I mean, I just went straight into them because you could
mm,
sample loads of organic sounds
mm,
and have
mm.
them then on a keyboard. I had many flute samples that I used, and
Yeah.
I often gravitated towards them for the melodic parts of what I was doing, rather than, for example, I mean, I did use replications of string sounds, but
Mm,
it was often flutes I'd go to because they were the more association with the human voice. There was kind
mm,
of
mm.
something more like a vocal line in
Yes.
the way that
Yeah.
flutes worked,
Yeah.
in the
Breath
expression of
and
a melody, an expression of a melody. So I'd been using them as a sort of lead sound, if you like. So already was interested in them, and I had tried. I mean, I'd picked up. I think I'd gone to get a penny whistle, like the Irish
mm,
whistles.
mm,
Um, the ones I was finding were, sort of the cheap ones you can buy down at the music store for, like, a few pounds, and the sound was very harsh.
mm,
Um, a lot of it was to do with my inability to sort of play it well, but it wasn't the sound that I was hearing in my head. The sound
mm,
in my head was much warmer and
mm,
softer and rounder, the
mm,
sound.
mm,
And I remember being in London, and I cannot remember where I was, but I heard someone play a Native American flute for the first time. And just remember, absolutely, like this light going. I said, that's
yeah.
it. Because I'd listened to beautiful woodwinds and silver flutes and stuff, and I'd worked with silver flute players, and I loved it. But there was, like, everything about that sound was not quite what I was. The sound in your head.
Mm.
I don't know whether you have this. There's a sound in your
Oh
head, and you
yeah.
need to find it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
it was like the yeah. So it's like this. The sound in your head. And when I heard these flutes playing, I just went, that's the sound. So there weren't any in the UK. I mean, this guy was playing one, but I don't know
Mm,
where it came from. Nobody was selling them. People didn't know about them. Um, So I started a bit of investigation, and I found an album by an amazing Native American man called Carlos Nakai called Canyon Trilogy.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
quite a famous album. It's like almost the
Mm.
first ever Native American flute. There might have been others. I don't know for sure, but it was the first global
Mm.
Native American flute album with just flutes
Mm.
through an echo called Canyon Trilogy. It's the most incredibly beautiful, pure recording, and he's still alive. This wonderful man is still playing, but and you know he's incredibly famous now. But so I listened to that, and then I was on my way to Australia for some concerts, and I had a stop off and some concerts in Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to see if I can find my flute while I'm
Yes.
in the States on the way. So I arrived in LA. I stayed with some friends who lived in the hills of outside LA, and I saw in the health food shop this advertisement for a Native American flute market, not flute, a marketplace for Native American craft.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so I went downtown, and it was in the Museum of Native American Art in downtown LA. And I walked into this show hall, and there was beautiful blankets and turquoise jewelry. And then I walked past the drums. But right at the back, I could hear this sound.
Oh, wow.
And I went right to the back of the hall, and there was this young man with a rack of instruments in front of him. And behind him, in the museum cabinets, were antique flutes from hundreds of years ago that
Wow.
looked exactly the same as what he had been making and was selling at the show. He was an amazing guy. I didn't know anything, so I just picked them up, and he said, "Oh, you play it like this, and you do this." And then I just sat there and I played. I can't remember. I think I was there most of the day. It must have been really frustrating for him, but he was very generous with his time. And I hadn't been doing many gigs, so I didn't have a lot of money on me. I had just enough money to buy one flute.
Oh, wow.
And I said to him, "Look, I've got. This is my last. You know, I haven't earned any money yet on my tour, and you know, can't. I bought one of the flutes from him, and he immediately said, "Yeah, well, you also need another flute," and he gave me as a
Oh.
gift. Just gave me another flute. I
Oh.
was like, "What? Why? Why? What?" It's just an amazing gift. So
That's
I arrived in
wonderful.
Australia with these flutes, and obviously I wasn't playing them in front of anybody. But I spent all the time that I wasn't doing the concerts and traveling around Australia in the bush and staying with friends, starting to learn to play.
Wonderful.
And within months, I was including them in the concerts and starting to record them. You know, it was immediate. I just
Fantastic.
immediately fell in love with them. So this
Fantastic.
man who I met
Yeah.
has since then become one of my closest friends.
Oh, I was going to
Name
say.
is Yeah, so his name is Guillermo Martinez, and he's probably one of the most famous Native American flute makers now.
Ah, wow.
I mean, he's extraordinary. His flutes are so beautiful. What I learned many years later, chatting to him one day, he'd arrived here for some concerts and teaching, and I showed him this flute. I said, "This is the first flute I ever got from you." And he went, "Oh God, that's terrible." And I said, "No, no, I love it." But he said, "Oh, I make them much better." I said, and he said, "Did
Wow.
you know that that was my first ever show?
Oh,
I'd never sold my instruments to anyone before. These were my first instruments I'd ever made."
wow.
And he didn't tell
Fantastic.
me, obviously at the time he was being a wise flute master, but
Yeah,
actually he was
yeah.
probably as nervous as I was
Yeah. What a
selling his
fantastic.
instrument.
Wow. It's the
um,
serendipity of these things.
yeah, and you know, like meeting friends, like meeting you, and meeting all these people that become
Yeah.
special in your life, is that
Yeah.
you know, you don't know when that's happening, do you?
No,
You
no, you're just doing it and you realize later, don't you?
think, I still know this person after all these years. I'm looking at you now, you know, all
Yeah.
these years later, you know, I'm looking at you going, you know, how long have we known each other for,
Yeah.
and how
30
special
years.
these special moments when we
Yeah.
meet, you know,
Yeah.
these lifelong friends, really.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so I think what happened over those years, I played and I started to record and I started to write on them. You know, actually using
mm,
rather than writing on the piano or the synthesizers, actually write on a flute, and that makes quite different music.
mm,
You know, if you write on a different instrument, you create very different types of music. But there was still some part that wasn't in place. And the part that wasn't in place is, however beautiful these instruments were and however wonderful Guillermo's work is, they're not made from the wood of my land.
Uh-huh.
That
Right.
we have very different trees that grow on this little island
Yeah.
than grow where Guillermo is.
Yes, yes.
So what I started doing is I went to a friend who was a very fine wood craftsman, but
Yeah.
he'd never made a flute. And I showed him one of the flutes and I said, do you think you could help me make one of these?
Yeah.
And we made our first flute. Me and this friend made our flutes together. We made one each.
Oh,
I made
wonderful.
mine from the floorboards from a nunnery,
From a
from some
nunnery.
old pine that was pulled out of a nunnery floorboards, because I was certain I was going to mess it up. So I thought, well, I'm not going to spend any money on the wood. I'm just going to use some free reclaimed wood.
Yeah, yeah.
And it worked. It played straight away.
Wow.
The first flute I ever made, I've still got it. And I mean, the tuning was terrible, but the sound was amazing.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
it sounded beautiful.
How
And
encouraging.
I just sort of went, this is incredible. Like I'm not a woodcraft. I didn't know anything about crafting with wood. I'd never, since school times, I'd never touched woodworking.
Yeah.
So it was a double
That's
whammy.
amazing.
One,
Yeah.
making something from nothing, and
Yeah.
two, making an instrument that could play. So that was it for
That's
me.
beautiful. Yeah.
I'd lost myself then, and still
Yeah.
have, in making these beautiful flutes from my land, from the wood that grows right on quite a bit of it on the farm, on trees that I've planted.
Oh, really?
But
Wow.
more widely, every
Yeah.
flute I make is made from wood from Dartmoor, or immediately
Wow.
on the edge of Dartmoor. I
Wonderful.
don't buy tropical woods. I don't, everything comes from the land that I love and I live on, and
And
it plays
does
the song of the land.
yeah, of course. And
Yeah,
did you notice a big tonal difference between, the
yes,
American flutes and so did the wood have a massive bearing on the tone?
absolutely. So
Wow.
the wood is like
Wow.
anything. You would like a great guitar, made of
Yeah, yeah.
particular types of woods, or a violin made in a particular way. That all of that tonality of these
Mm,
acoustic instruments comes from the materials. And the more you learn about that, the more
yeah.
amazing it becomes. I understand now why the great piano makers,
Yeah.
Steinway and these people, go
Yes.
to one tiny little bit of forest
Yeah.
in Europe, to one valley, to cut the trees that they use for the soundboards inside their
Yeah.
pianos.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why Stradivarius violins can't be remade because they were made from a very particular wood from one particular area that had a sonic property that created those sounds of those instruments.
Isn't that
Isn't it
amazing?
amazing? Isn't it
Yeah.
incredible?
Beautiful.
Um,
Beautiful.
and for me, I'm not so interested in finding it down to one sound I'm trying to chase. What I love about is the variety.
Mm,
So every tree has a voice. Every tree has a song.
wow.
And I did an album, another Dartmoor album. Dartmoor Roundhouse was recorded in a roundhouse that we built, a Neolithic, Bronze Age style building that used to be all over Dartmoor from our
Wow.
ancient people. And so I built the house from stone and granite and thatch and everything. And then I made the flutes and then I recorded them in the building.
Oh, wow.
So it was a long project.
Yes.
And on
Talk
it's
about
ridiculous, isn't
dedication
it?
to your
It's
art.
ridiculous, isn't it? It's madness when it happens.
But that
But basically,
sums up what you do on this magical property. It's just sums it up perfectly, I think.
yeah, there's a sort of madness, I guess, involved.
Ah, it's
But
beautiful.
basically, there's 13 woods used on that album.
13, right.
13 different trees. Each had a track. Each had a song.
Oh, right. Fantastic.
So that was the story of creating that album. I learned so much from doing it. The tonality of these beautiful instruments and how
So
they affect everything.
does every different piece of wood or species of wood have quite a different tonality or timbre to it? Like, is
I mean,
the
yeah. I mean,
range quite marked, or is it?
yes,
Wow.
yeah. So basically, when if you think about a flute, you're thinking about a vessel that holds air, and the way it holds air, it depends on the density of that piece of wood.
Hmm.
There's many other factors that also change it, but if you think about just the density of the wood itself,
Mm.
that is what makes the sound and
Yeah.
contains the sound. So the very obvious starting point is that a very hard wood,
Mm.
um, I'm thinking of really hard woods like fruit woods, or like great recorders are often made of fruit woods because they're very, very dense wood.
Yeah.
Holly, these type of
Mm.
very dense and hard woods,
Mm.
they don't absorb much sound at all. They reflect it. So the sounds you
Ah,
get are very sharp and clear.
yes.
Go to the very softest end of the woods that I used, things like silver birch and rowan. These are very soft, almost spongy
Yeah, right.
woods. They absorb the sound into the waves, the sound waves get absorbed into that wood,
Fascinating.
and therefore they become much softer and breathier. So
Yeah.
that's a very simple bit. I mean,
Yeah.
but there's so much more,
Yeah, I'm
so
sure.
much more. But that gives you just like an indication of the
Yeah.
sort of the early tonalities you can get, and the range then you can get in between those the softest and hardest woods.
Yeah,
The
right.
sliding scale of different tonalities,
Mm.
and
Like,
so it becomes obsessive because then you're creating a piece of music that you need a particular sound for. You say,
yeah.
I don't want something really strident, I don't want something really soft, but I need something like this. And then you'll chase the piece of wood that might produce this sound for the composition. The other way it works is you make a flute and it has a particular sound, and the composition creates itself around that
Hmm.
sound of that piece of wood.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So it's endless. I mean, it's infinite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like every piece of wood is. And have you ever
Yeah.
picked up a piece of wood and thought, "Oh, this will make an amazing flute," and it has gone on to make an amazing flute
Yeah,
every
yeah,
time, maybe.
definitely. I collect wood myself from the farm.
Yeah.
I have friends who work in the timber area who cut wood on Dartmoor, and they let me know when they've cut bits of forestry, and they say you need to get in there quickly because
Yeah.
it's all going to be firewood soon. Get in there and get some
Oh,
wood out. And
isn't
then the
that amazing?
last part of that, I know they're great friends. And then the last part of that is there's a friend who runs a sawmill. He's a Dartmoor farmer. Um, Many generations he's been farming here, and there's a very special species of person that is a Dartmoor farmer. They're usually very interesting characters. But his side project is wood, and he has a sawmill,
Yeah.
and he for years has been um, cutting and milling wood on Dartmoor. And I went to him in my earliest days of flute making, and then I had very long hair, very hippie looking, and
I
went
remember.
in asking him about flutes, wood for flutes, and he found this fascinating. I think he talked to a lot of his friends about it. He found it wonderfully enjoyable entertainment. And you on Dartmoor, it's like you get your entertainment where you can. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the
yeah.
bush. If you're out there, you don't get a lot of interesting things that are different on your normal life. So I was very different. But he actually he's a lovely man, very intelligent, wonderfully knowledgeable about farming and Dartmoor, but also about the wood as well, and has become my great friend,
Mm,
and whiskey drinking companion of a
that
long Dartmoor dark evening.
awesome.
And he often phones me and says, "Look, I've got some wood that you're going to love." And I just know
Nice.
that I'm not going to have any money left at the end of these exchanges. But he's always right. He
Right.
knows
He's a
now.
good spotter.
He's a natural feel for wood, and
Yeah.
even the type of things that I use the wood for, which is to make the flutes.
Mm.
So one time he contacted me and said, "You've got to come over, Nigel." He said, "You've got to come and see this." He said. So I went over to his farm, which is about 15
Yeah.
minutes away. And in the yard, there was a sort of something that looked like a black rock. It
Wow.
didn't look, normally they're planks or they're
Yeah, yeah.
whole rounds of wood. This just looked like a misshapen black lump. And I was going, okay, his name's Anton. I said, Anton, what on earth are you doing now? He said, "You're going to love this." I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, let me just cut it open."
Uh-huh.
So he pulled some lumps of rock out of the thing that looked like there were stones stuck in it and bits of earth.
Yeah, yeah.
He's pulled them out. He
Wow.
put it on his great big Stenner saw, which is a big bandsaw, and he sliced through it. It fell in half. But
Mm.
inside there was the most beautiful, beautiful pattern of this swirling dark and honey colors, and sort of like a swirling mass of patterns. And I said, I don't even know what I'm looking at. He said, okay, so this is really special. This is not wood that has ever seen the light of day. It's never been a trunk. It's never been a branch. It's never been a twig. This is a root.
A root.
This is the root of a tree.
Wow.
And more specifically, this is the root of a very old walnut tree.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
So the people where the tree had become diseased and it was falling, and they cut it down. And walnut wood is well known for instrument making and for furniture making. A very beautiful dark wood, grows quite well on the edges of Dartmoor. And the tree had to be taken down. The people who asked him to take the tree down said, "Look, you need to get this root out because we don't want it here." So with diggers, they dug this huge ball out of the ground. That was this walnut root, and the wood that started to be produced from it. He knew it was going to be amazing. I mean, he knew from his experience, and it was just the most beautiful thing.
Wow.
And I said, I've got to have some of that. He said, this is very precious wood. There's very little that's going to be usable because most of it will be rotten or it will have damage or whatever. So there's only going to be a very small amount of wood that comes out of this. So he gave me this chunk of gnarly black stuff.
Yeah.
So I only had enough to make a couple of flutes.
Yeah.
And I made a flute for my friend in Japan. He's a flute player called Hiroki Okano, and I knew I wanted to gift him something very special.
Oh, wow.
And I made a flute for him from this. And then I had quite a well-known musician come to me, and she was more of guitar and singer, but she wanted a flute, and she ordered a flute in a key. Now these flutes come in different sizes, and they can get very big and they're very tiny. But the very big ones are very difficult to play because the finger stretch it's very hard. And she asked for a specific key, and I said to her, "This flute could be quite hard for you to play." And she said, "No, I think it'll be fine." And I went, "Okay, all right,
okay,
whatever you say."
Yeah.
And she saw the walnut root, and she said, "I want the flute made from this wood." And I was like, "Okay." Okay. And I said, "But the whole lesson here is to give away, isn't it? It's always never to hold on, never just to go."
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay, great. I'll make you this flute." And the particular style I made her was a drone flute. It's two barrels. So you get a support. So you get two instruments next to each other from the same instrument.
Wow.
And they allow you to create a drone note behind your melody note.
How amazing.
And they're very beautiful. And this technique, I believe, this type of flute was invented by my friend Guillermo, who I was talking about earlier.
Oh, right.
And he fused two cultures to make this very beautiful new instrument. And there are drone flutes in many cultures, and we have them in Europe and in the Middle East, and there are a history of drone flutes being made around the world. But this is quite a new type of instrument. So I made this flute out of this beautiful walnut root.
Yeah.
And as I made it, and as the process went on, I got more and more attached to it. Now I get attached to every flute I make.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Whoever they're for, I make them as well as I can make them.
Yeah.
And you do, they all have a beautiful individual characteristic. But this flute was like, really, I was like, oh God, this is me. And then the first sound it made, it just sang. And some woods do this. They just have a voice so much wanting to come out. It was just like, this beautiful sound. I was like, oh God, it also sounds beautiful. Anyway, so this process went on. I finished the flute. I tuned it. It tuned up perfectly. It was instant. It sounded amazing from the very get-go. It was just the most beautiful sounding instrument. And then I told her it was ready, and she came in to pick it up. And it was really hard. She almost had to pull it out of my hands. I was like,
oh no. Yeah.
And she took it and she went away. And I just went, no, it's great. This is such a good lesson.
Yeah.
It's great. She needs this instrument.
Yeah.
It's incredibly beautiful. It's utterly unique and special, and she should have it. And so off it went, and I just, with a little tear, and I let it go. And then I think a month or 2 months went by. I got a phone call from her, and I thought, oh, this is nice. She's calling,
Yeah,
and she
yeah.
called up and she said, oh, Nigel, and I said, oh, how are you enjoying your flute? She said, oh, it's so beautiful. It looks so amazing. It's so beautiful. And I said, oh, that's so great. She said, but, and I went, oh, she said, but everything is perfect about it, but it's just a little bit too large. And I feel so terrible about calling you and letting you know this. And I said, really, a bit too fast. I went, don't worry, bring it back.
Bring it straight back.
Yeah, no problem, no problems. And she was like, "Oh, really?" She said, "I thought you'd be really upset." And I said, "No, no, no. All these instruments, they've got to be perfect for you. They've got to be just
Wow.
right. So please don't worry. Please just bring it back."
Oh,
In the back of
fantastic.
my head, you can tell what was happening in the back of my head. I was
Yeah,
going,
yeah.
"Is this happening?" Anyway, so she arrived at the farm,
Wow. Brilliant.
and she handed me the flute.
And that's
And she
it.
said, "I'm so sorry, Nigel. I can't play it. It's just too uncomfortable to play." And I almost grabbed it out and said, "Don't worry, I'll make you another flute, and I'll make it to fit your fingers perfectly and stuff like that."
Wow.
This
Wow.
is the walnut root flute that was given away,
And it's come back to
and
its where it should be.
came
Wow.
back. Is
Look at
that
the
focusing okay on
grain.
the camera?
That grain in it.
See the tiger stripes?
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to tell over the webcam, but
Yeah.
it's iridescent, and
Oh, right.
it looks like it's three-dimensional. It
Yeah,
looks like
cool.
you can look into the grain. You see these stripes that
Yeah,
oscillate, that move and change.
yeah.
And on the back,
Oh, wow. Oh, Nigel, that's just so beautiful. That was awesome. That was beautiful. Actually, you took me somewhere just in that short time.
it's become an instrument that I literally travel everywhere. I never let it out of my hands now. I take it with me,
Mm,
to almost every concert, and if I
okay.
travel, even if I'm not going to play music, it travels with me. And I
Wow.
think that for
Wow.
me, it was this beautiful lesson of the fact of this beautiful thing of you need to let go of these things. Our nature
Mm,
as humans whoever we are, is that we like to hold on to things that are precious to us. But sometimes letting them go is actually a more beautiful and powerful experience. And it was a wonderful indicator of that. It was quite a hard journey for me, but one that was
Wonderful.
beautiful. And it made the story of the flute different from if I just made it for myself. Do you know there's an end to this story? Or, I mean, the story never ends really, but there is an end to this. Just recently, I went over to get some wood sawn by my friend Anton at the farm.
Yeah.
And I told him the story of this flute and how special it was, and how the people had, some of it had gone to Japan and stuff. And I said, it's been a wonderful gift having something that's so rare that what you make of it becomes very important. And he said, "Oh, well, you mean the walnut root?" And I said, "Yeah, you remember the walnut?" He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Do you want some more?"
Oh.
I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, I've got loads of it here."
Oh. Oh,
I was
right.
like, "What? But you told me that this
Yeah.
was the only." He said, "Oh no, I only showed you a tiny part of it.
Oh, wow. Wow.
At the back of the yard, I've still got like a big slab of this left."
Oh, wow.
And I'd been going around telling everybody that this was the rarest wood in the world, like
Yeah, yeah.
like literally it's the most precious thing.
Wow.
Anton had shown me one offcut.
Wow. So
This
you've
root ball was enormous. It was enormous.
wow.
And so I went to the
Fantastic.
back of the work, and he said, "Yeah, look at this." And I went, "Could
I'll
you
have it.
give me some more?" And he said, I said, "I'll have anything you've got." So I have got
Yeah,
some
yeah.
more of this wood, and I have got it there for some special time.
Mm,
It will be there waiting for someone
mm.
to make them
Oh,
something really
that's
special.
magic. I wanted to ask you, what did your Japanese friend think of the gift?
Well, I mean, this is sort of another part of the whole story, really. I mean, like yourself, like I was traveling. I came to Australia.
Mm,
You were so generous and kind, and we organised a concert, and you did all that work, and your generosity and kindness. I can't say how important it was for both me and Carolyn.
oh, thank
When
you.
we were as
Oh,
travelers on the road,
it was
and
our
I think
pleasure.
that they,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really special, and it's really, it's a generous heart that does that things.
Oh,
But
thank
I
you.
have to say that I have experienced this traveling of the
Mm,
wonderful people that I've met. I talked about Guillermo, giving me a flute on the very first day that I had a flute. My
mm,
friend in
mm.
Japan, Hiroki Okano, is a very famous Japanese ambient composer and someone that I'd love you to get to know his work.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it's
please, yeah.
definitely worth following, looking him up,
I'd
following
love
what he
to.
does, because he would be a wonderful man to
Yeah,
interview for
yeah.
future things. Because he's just a most wonderful man,
Love to, love to.
and a great friend. So he's hosted me in Japan many times now, and Japan has become, like when I travel to Australia. You don't know, you have an idea about what something's going to be like, but when you
Yeah,
go, it's
yeah.
different, and it has a richness and more beauty
Mm,
than you could ever
mm.
possibly foresee. The experiences in Australia for me were so many friends, so many incredible, so
Yeah.
many things I learned.
Mm,
And learned about the fact that sometimes you can't help yourself. You prejudge, and then
mm,
you go somewhere and it's very different and it's very
mm,
much more magical and deep. So
mm.
Japan was like this too. And my friend Hiroki um, has hosted me many times in concert tours in Japan. And the most amazing thing about them is that they've often been in very sacred places, in
Beautiful.
mountain temples.
Oh,
They're
wow.
almost the most
Wow.
magical. You can't imagine, you cannot begin to imagine, well, maybe you can, how beautiful these ancient Japanese temples are.
With
But to be able
beautiful
to
reverbs, no doubt.
everything, and overlooking oceans or mountain
Mm,
ranges, or temples in the hills with
that's
all the
profound.
trees, and that everything we understand about that sacred part of Japanese culture. But to be
Mm,
able to go there and actually play music in these places,
mm.
ancient, beautiful temples, how could you ever imagine you'd ever be allowed to do that?
Yeah.
So Hiroki, this wonderful friend, has allowed me into this space
Mm,
to be able to play music at these events, and
what a
in these
privilege.
beautiful places. And
Mm,
that's why I made him the flute,
mm, mm,
because how can you ever repay
mm, mm.
that? Um, Although, in fact, in recent terms, I've managed to get him playing at some beautiful places in the UK.
Oh,
We've kind of done
nice.
this exchange now, where I've got him on the main stage at Glastonbury Festival.
Oh,
I've
awesome.
taken him to ancient sites all over UK
Yeah,
to
yeah.
play his music. So there is an
Oh,
exchange there, but I never take it for granted.
mm,
The generosity of people when you travel. I
yeah.
think my one of my most amazing experiences there was that the second time I went, he'd got me a concert at the Cherry Blossom Festival in Kyoto.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
So I didn't know what that means. I know that the cherry blossom time in Japan is very sacred time for them,
Mm,
and Kyoto is the ancient capital with all the old wooden buildings in. But I didn't understand the significance and cultural significance of what it meant.
mm.
He had booked me a concert to play at the Heian Shrine, which is one of the most important and most ancient shrines in the whole of Japan,
Wow.
at
Wow.
cherry blossom time, to perform in the temple over a lake at night.
Oh, gosh.
And I didn't know this. I mean, I went there, and he said, "This is he said, he's lovely." He said, "So Nigel, this is such an important concert for Japanese people. We have to be very good performers." That we have to play really well. We have to
No
rehearse.
pressure. No
No pressure.
pressure.
I went, okay. So we went on the day of the concert. I went to I'd never seen the place before, and I walked into this big open. The whole temple, the whole side of it opens up. It's huge, huge.
Mm,
This temple,
mm.
and becomes an enormous stage in a way.
Yeah.
But behind is this screen that's painted silk and paper,
Mm,
that's painted with gold paint. It's a
mm.
national treasure.
Wow.
And the first thing that the people said to me, the monks and things, please don't touch. I was like, oh, okay, right, okay, I mustn't touch that. Anyway, so the setup was like, you immediately start to feel quite nervous.
Yeah.
And then I looked out, and there's in front of me, right in front of where the temple ends, is just water.
Wow. Wow.
And a long, long way away is the banks of the lake with all the blossoms falling and
Oh,
down.
it must be stunning.
And that's where we played our concert, over the water, to thousands and thousands of people who we couldn't see
Oh,
because it was
really?
dark. It
Wow.
was nighttime.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It was just the most profound, beautiful experience because the sound over water was really different. It was really,
Mm, mm.
it does something to the sound.
D-
For
Yeah.
me to play and for people to listen, it was very different.
I
It
imagine
was an amazing experience.
it would carry
Yeah,
quite well, wouldn't it?
it does. It
Yeah.
reflects out over the water
Yeah.
in a very particular way.
Oh, be
What Hiroki
hauntingly
hadn't told
beautiful.
me, what Hiroki hadn't told me was that I was the first ever non-Japanese person to play
Oh, what?
this event.
I'm,
And
I'm,
he,
I'm,
he told me 5 minutes before we
oh,
walked out
no.
on the stage.
Oh, no. I was hoping he'd told you after. Oh, no.
Just
Oh,
before he came in and said, "So Nigel, because he played with me, we performed together. I played pieces on my own, but he supported me in some other pieces. And
oh
he
my
said, "So Nigel,
gosh.
this is such a special concert. This is such honor for you." And I said, "Oh, I know." I said, "I know." He said, "No, really." And I said, "Okay, yeah, all right, okay." And he said, "No, no, you're you are the first ever European person or non-Japanese person to ever play here."
Wow.
But I went, "What?
Oh my
Really?"
God. Oh my
Um,
God. Oh,
it, it
what?
was amazing. So much of it is just trust,
Mm,
and there's a sort of, if there's one thing that I think um, that helps is either you can call it sort of blind ignorance or lack of fear about putting
yeah, yeah,
yourself in a position where it could not work out, or it could go wrong, or it could be not what. And I
mm,
think that is actually
yeah,
quite. I don't want to undervalue that. I think
yeah,
that kind of thing of going, I've got nothing to lose here. Oh, will I look a fool? Will
mm,
think, well, but what's going to happen here? What
yeah,
what's actually really going to happen?
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
my ego will be bruised and damaged, or
yeah.
I won't. I think this is quite an important part
mm.
of creativity, really,
Yes,
of truly expressing yourself and not
yes,
being frightened,
yeah,
and not letting that be something that's a barrier of how you can be who
yeah,
you really want to be.
and
And
putting that self judgment to the side, is a big part of it, isn't it? And
you
trusting
know,
that it'll take care
yeah,
of itself.
and going of having context in everything that we do.
Yeah,
We the trouble is with ourselves is that we build up our fall, if you like, or the potential failures as
mm,
being too important, too
mm,
destructive, too
mm,
big in our lives.
mm.
So we use them then as a barrier to stop ourselves, to inhibit ourselves because of the fear of that going wrong.
Yeah,
And I think that's, I mean, how you overcome those things, I don't know. That's not my, I can't I can't find a way. There's not a definitive way because that will be different for everybody to be able to do that. But just the acknowledgement of it as a fear being such a big key to
mm,
so many of our life experiences happening or not happening.
mm.
You know,
Yeah, and
oh, I wish I'd done that, but I was too
yeah,
afraid for it to happen.
it's often proportional to the courage that you show, isn't it? The experience that comes from it when you just decide to be courageous and go ahead anyway, and then you end up with this amazing experience from
Yeah.
having the courage and just putting the fear to the side.
And particularly with music and
Mm,
with a creative thing, because the thing
mm,
is, I'm not jumping out of an aeroplane or off a waterfall. I'm not actually risking anything apart from my own self opinion. The
yeah,
only thing that's in danger is your opinion of yourself and your fear, that you might, you know,
mm,
damage something that you think about yourself. So,
yeah,
the context is also important about learning about actually what is
mm,
at stake here.
yeah,
Is this life and death? No, it's not life and death. So
yeah,
actually, why aren't I going? If it's not life and death, why
yeah,
don't I just go? Why don't I just go and do it?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Because it isn't life and death. So I think that is an important part of
Mm,
creativity, really, isn't it? About that fearless, trying to be fearlessness in what you create.
yeah, that's an
You know,
awesome point. Love that. Absolutely. And I know that travel has been a massive part of what you do. Did you travel extensively to explore other musical avenues, or was it to take your music to those places? What was the main kind of driver around that?
in fact, it was both because I definitely did some journeys where I was going to try and discover musical things to go to try and look at what music was happening in those places. But then at the same time, then it became a thing of going, there's an exchange that can happen here.
Mm, mm,
We have a language here that is a global language.
yeah.
Everybody can understand. If I go to, I mean, I've made many journeys, particularly to Siberia, to northern parts of
Right.
Arctic
Wow.
Russia,
Wow.
and worked with musicians there. And it's absolutely true. We don't have any single word in common with each other. I mean, we obviously went with a translator, and I speak very little Russian, but I when we were there and we were playing music, it didn't matter. It was
Yeah.
utterly irrelevant. It was
Yeah.
completely unimportant. And I know this
Wow.
has been talked about by musicians all the time about how it's a global language, and of course it is. But I think with tribal music, there's something so deep about that.
Mm,
It's a very visceral thing.
mm,
It's not another layer that you can choose to do or not do. It's a binding force within those people that
mm.
that holds their whole thing together, especially in places like Siberia, where there's an extreme of our ability to live as a human. Is that music is a binding force that is absolutely vital.
Wow. And the
It's like a
rituals.
food.
Yeah.
So yeah, the food, so the rituals and the place that music hands to hold the stories of the tribe,
Mm,
um, the deep significance and the relationship with the land, and to give the context of relationship of the land, which is obviously very powerful there. The
mm,
land dominates everything. It's an environment where you can lose your life very easily. It
Mm.
isn't controlled by humans. It isn't a
Yeah.
safe landscape. You
Yes.
know, in fact, interestingly enough, although I've made journeys to the tropics as well, to equatorial places, it's actually, well, I say this, I mean, it's all relative, relatively easy to live in a warm place with food
Mm.
abundant all year round
Mm.
than it is to live in the extremes of the north where
I can imagine.
there isn't food and you
Yes.
really are on the edges of starvation and you, your body,
Mm.
you can live on the tropics quite easily,
Mm.
compared to living in the north.
Mm. Mm.
So I found the north particularly fascinating. But also that reason of that travel was about an understanding of my own culture. I live in the north of Europe.
Mm.
This landscape was formed, and the cultural human landscape of it was formed really on this island at the end of the last ice age.
Mm.
So we're talking about 10,000 years ago in the UK.
Yeah.
So our ancient roots are in ice. The earliest people that came back to this land that I live on now
Mm.
were coming in as the ice retreated, and they were nomadic people. And I wanted to try to understand what that was like. And now I
Ah,
can't go
cool.
back in. I can't do a turn. I don't have a time machine to go back in time
Yeah.
to what my land was like then. But I can make a geographical journey north.
Mm.
Because that geographical journey north is like stepping back in time of what my land used to be like. And so we found people like the Sami people in northern Scandinavia, in Norway, and well, specifically Sweden for us, but northern Norway, Finland. The Sami people
Mm.
still live following the reindeer herds,
Oh, wow.
and they still live this incredible, or part of them, they try in the modern world to live this nomadic life that is governed by the land. And when you go to the northern Siberia, they absolutely do. I've never experienced anything so far away from
Mm.
our Western world. There are all the comforts and everything we have. I was totally reliant on those people just to even stay alive.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they had left me, I'd have been dead in a day.
Wow.
So, it gives you a whole different sort of context of
Mm.
how you're working. We were really lucky. That started as an exploration. We went to Moscow to a tribal people's gathering, which they had in Moscow
Oh, wow.
um, every year, and we'd heard about it, and we went there specifically, me and Carolyn, to try and talk to Siberian musicians, and we met many amazing people, but one close contact was with a tribal singer called Tatiana La. So Tatiana is a singer for her tribe, who are the Nenets. That's Nenets, Nenets people, who are a tribal group who live right in the center of Siberia, right in the Arctic.
Wow.
So right up on the north, in the far north. And she's come here and she's sung her songs to British people,
Yeah.
and we've travelled to her to sing to her people.
Wow.
And this beautiful exchange, and we recognise each other's songs because they're about the land. She
Yeah.
sings about her land and her
Yeah.
people,
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
and we do the same. So we have this sort of understanding of
Mm.
where what this relationship with what music is really about on a very deep level, about an
Yeah.
expression of ourselves.
By seeing that kind of historical landscape to what it would have been like in Britain at the end of the Ice Age, did it give you a renewed or deeper appreciation for Dartmoor after you'd been there?
Yeah, I think it wasn't like it taught me anything particularly about Dartmoor as a landmass,
Mm.
but I think that it absolutely helped me go on into another layer of listening.
Ah, yeah.
So the way that the tribal people, in this particular instance, the way she writes her music is by listening.
Mm.
And I'd always tried to do this. I'd gone when I was doing the recording of the natural sounds. That's about listening to the land and trying to
Mm.
create with it. But there are layers and layers within that of the way that you do that, and the way that she was um, talking about doing it is playing to the land, listening to the response, changing what you play by listening. You constantly, this is like a conversation that happens
Yeah, yeah.
between the land and the musician. And
Mm,
I love this concept. I just
mm,
thought it was really, really beautiful
mm,
and incredibly simple. It's like everybody
mm.
could do it. Everybody in this tribe were musicians. They all took part. She was the singer because she'd taken it upon herself to step out from the tribe to take her culture out. But they all sang, and they all partook of music
Mm.
as an expression of their landscape.
I love that
So
that sentiment of deep listening. That's a beautiful sentiment, isn't it?
for
Mm,
me, I think the
mm.
deepest joy of music is really hearing it,
Yeah,
really sitting with it in a quiet space and letting it completely inhabit you, and you inhabit it. And
yeah.
I can't underestimate how
Mm.
incredibly deep that is for me, and I
Yeah.
think for most people.
Absolutely. Whenever I release a new album or a new single or whatever, I always say to people, please have a headphone listen. There is so much intricacy in there that you're not going to get
Yeah,
if you just have it coming out of your iPhone or whatever phone you've got. It has been lovingly mixed on proper,
yeah.
monitors, and the intricacies. Just please, just do that once, and then do what you
Even
like
if you only
after
do it
that.
once.
Yeah, yeah. Just deeply
It's kind of
listen
almost like
deep.
a
It's a
it's like a
plea,
beg
isn't it?
almost. It's
Yeah,
like almost
yeah, yeah,
begging, please hear my
yeah,
music, how I wrote it,
yeah,
how I
yeah.
composed it, all the
Exactly.
part I took, all the time I took.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
mm,
totally support this, and I think that
yeah,
I think that it's something that we do forget. And I think the thing about, we're talking about ancient music, we're talking about tribal music, we're talking about
mm,
all these things, is always knowing how important music is,
mm,
of just how crucial it is. I cannot stress enough how it gives us so much depth and warmth
mm,
in our life, so
mm.
much support, memories,
Yeah.
inspiration, support when our lives are utterly desperate,
Yes,
um, you
yes.
know, joy when our lives are utterly joyful. All of these things music can do, and I
Mm,
can't,
mm.
I can't say how, for my life, I can't imagine how my life would have been,
Yeah,
without having music in it.
yeah.
Because I
It
still remember listening to music when I was young,
yeah.
and 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 I think that the reason I became a musician is because although I absolutely loved everything I was listening to, I'd listen
Mm,
to things time and time again, endlessly listening to the same piece of music over and over and over,
yeah,
trying to find out more of its secrets.
yeah.
But actually, the reason I think I decided I want to make music is fundamentally because there was still something missing from however much I love them and still love some of those pieces of music today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There was still somewhere they didn't quite go. There
Yeah,
was still
yeah.
some secret layer that they didn't quite unlock, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So how could I do that? The only way of doing it was by doing it myself, which may seem very arrogant, but it was
No, I
actually
can
because I was thinking, I wonder if I can make those sounds or those melodies that I know are just beyond that point of which
yeah,
I'm not hearing in the music that I'm listening to. Although that music is fantastic, I didn't want to play that music. I didn't want to replicate what they were doing. I didn't
mm,
want to just copy what they were doing. What I was looking for
mm,
was something else, and still another step that
yeah,
I kind of appreciated that this music was enough for them. That's what they wanted to create. But there
yeah,
was something else that I wanted. I did know that I had a voice for myself. I had
yeah,
sounds that I wanted to hear. I had melodies that I wanted to become a particular way.
mm,
And only I could do that.
yes, yes,
Could write the music that in the end that I wanted to hear. Everything I've done is kind of like an extraordinary three-dimensional, multi-dimensional diary of my
yes,
life,
yes,
where I can recreate. I can go exactly to where I was. Now I'm very critical of my own work. I can absolutely hear everything that I didn't achieve, and techniques and things that I didn't pull off. So I am a critic, but I can also completely let go of that
mm,
music because that's who I was then. That was the best I could do
yeah,
at that time, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
fine,
yeah,
And but
mm,
I love the fact that I can look back and say, yeah, I remember that. Particularly as I've got older, that as we get older, our sometimes, I think we do experience more sort of bruising aspects of life, if I can put it like that. When we're younger, hard things happen to us, but we're young and they bounce off, or we haven't had many of them. But as you get older, the losses of people we love, are profoundly important, and that obviously builds. If we're lucky enough to get older, we will lose people we love. Things happen to us physically or mentally. These experiences are compounded and build up in ourselves, and I think they become profound in creating music. That's definitely become part of my music as it's progressed. I can feel a sort of, a sort of, it's not a sadness as in a sort of like a mournfulness of like being sad all the time, but that sense of those deep experiences of life that have become part of the creative process that are absent from the earlier pieces. So I think, when we view music like that, and why we write, why do we create something, those early days of going, there's just something more that could be done in that piece of music. How will that ever happen? Oh, I'll have to go out and try and find out if I can do it, to the journey of going and listening to our young music and going, I was young and that was the experience, and now these experiences go into the pieces of work.
I think there's a
I think that's profound.
Yeah, it's very profound. I know, for me, I've felt a deepening in the whole process, and just where you can, I don't know, I guess we're calling on more history and more feelings, and every little experience just all goes into the toolkit for searching for that elusive next piece of music.
I think my music's become, it's always had, and it's always been personal, obviously, because I'm personally right, but I think it's become more personal, particularly working with Carolyn, who's obviously is a lyric writer. So when you do stuff with lyrics, it becomes, it gets much more it can get much more upfront in meaning. With the instrumental music, it can be very diffuse. I mean, you can absolutely put a meaning in there that no one else will know exactly why you put that in there, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's not being done for that reason. But you can place it in there. But if you do it with words, it can get much more specific to particular things. And we worked on an album, the last album we worked on together, because we do albums apart and we do albums together. And obviously when we work together, we're working with vocals and we're working with lyrics and things like that, which is not my natural forte, as it were, although I do input into that. But we did an album called Nine Prayers North as our most recent thing. So Nine Prayers North was an idea about the fact that that North is actually more about, rather than a direction on a compass, is about a state of mind, and it's about being older. Our North becomes our age, our aging as older people. And we created a song, one of the songs on the album, that was basically we sang a song about the gifts we'd given each other through all the years we've been together. Including taking it right to the point of when one of us goes, because one of us is going to go first. This is a really deep personal journey. I mean, this is pretty hugely profound, and it's not kind of we wanted to share anything sort of particularly about wanting people to feel anything about us, but to be able to say to each other, to acknowledge all the things we've been to each other, all the things we are now, and all of it right the way through to the last part of when we won't create together anymore. And it was really very difficult, but also really important for us to do this. Not just in the privacy of our own studio, but to put it on an album and have it. I mean, it's not very obvious. It's not like we're saying it is a really obvious thing to people, but that's exactly what the lyrics mean. They're about our personal journey in being together. And it felt really important to do. I'd never have done that, 20 years ago. I wouldn't even dreamt of everything was much more outside us,
Yes, yes, yes.
about, less personal things.
You've had a such a deep and rich career, so many aspects to what you've achieved and still are achieving to this day, and all of which I have massive respect for, absolute massive respect for. And you're an absolute inspiration. And I know you're an inspiration to many, 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 many listeners. And you've created a soundtrack for their lives. That's the other thing you do, you and Carolyn, is you're creating a soundtrack to your own life, but you're also creating a soundtrack to thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives as well. And I think, isn't that such a profound privilege to be able to
Yeah.
create the soundtrack to other people's special moments and profound moments in their lives? I just think that's an incredible thing. But given the breadth and depth of your career thus far, what do you think you're most proud about?
Yeah, I think it change. I mean, that changes all the time. I
Yes.
mean, I think I'm proud that I've been able to wake up every morning and call myself a musician for sort of 40 years. I mean, just to be able to do that. I mean, I've got so many incredibly talented friends who are way more talented and incredible at music than I am, who don't do that. So you need to contextualize the pure luck.
Mm,
And I don't just find I don't know how this stuff works. I don't kind of look into it very much because I don't think that's particularly healthy. I, but I do feel it as a absolute privilege.
mm,
And I am proud because I also know, I do acknowledge that it's a vast amount of work, and I'm looking at you, and I know how much work you put into your career. I just know how much work. Absolutely, people say,
mm,
well, it's not working on a coal face or digging or mending roads and stuff. No, it isn't hard physical work. Well, it can be sometimes,
mm,
but it is incredibly hard, intense work,
mm,
and never to be underestimated. Just to achieve those sort of things as a musician,
mm,
particularly independent musicians.
mm,
It does feel like an area of music that's kind of like definitely overlooked and
mm,
not acknowledged for some of the things it's done. But
mm.
actually, people like Kevin and yourself are sort of groundbreaking. There weren't loads of people doing that when you were
Mm,
doing it. You did
mm.
jump out into a new zone and new world,
Yeah, yeah,
which now is people would find much more commonplace. But at the time, it was kind of like a proper adventure into
yeah,
something
yeah,
kind of quite unknown,
yeah,
without any of the
yeah,
safety of normal acceptable music
yeah.
styles. And that there would
Just
be people who were needing to hear music that wasn't,
yeah,
that was just putting them into a very different place, and
yeah,
and understanding that space. There's lots of people creating ambient music, but it doesn't always have, and it may have lots of space in it.
mm,
But the people don't have the space. They don't
mm,
have that kind of
yeah,
place that they're in. And,
yeah,
and, and I do genuinely think I can recognize it. I
yeah,
can recognize when people are writing a piece of music because they're going, oh, I think I'll just do some ambient music.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when they
yeah,
go, and then when they're going, this is my world that I
yeah,
inhabit, and I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
try and play it,
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, I do think I can do it,
yeah,
now.
yeah,
It's like a life's work of following some intrinsic truth within our creativity. And I
yeah,
think that is so admirable. And so I've always admired this sort of fringe of music. I loved punk music.
yeah,
When punk started in the UK, I was a young man, I was like, well, I was a teenager. Within its purest form, it was about just an outrush of creativity
yeah,
and
yeah,
pure expression.
yeah,
And I loved it. The weirdest thing is, and I'm sure loads of punks or ex-punks would probably be really upset by this, but I felt that the music that some of us were doing in the early days was, although it was very gentle and peaceful music, had a punk ethic to it, because
mm,
the
mm,
point is it was all self-created, because there was no money, there was no backing,
yeah,
there was
yeah,
no
yeah,
big record labels, there was
yeah,
no
yeah,
radio play,
yeah,
there was nothing,
yeah,
and so you had to do it yourself,
yeah,
and you had to believe in your work. enough, which is much harder to do when no one else is telling you what you're doing is okay. So it was kind of like I always equate it that there was an element of this sort of punk ethos behind creating this work, which I know feels like a real jarring kind of combination of different musical styles, but it did feel like that, because I think it, in a way more so than punk, it still remained outside the thing, whereas punk became immediately absorbed into vast money-making schemes and big record label things. So
Yeah.
I love that independence of thought and the bravery of musicians who just kind of went, you know what, I'm just going to work with this because I totally believe this is what I want to create.
Yeah.
It's very pure. So I'm
Absolutely.
very proud that I think what I'm proud about is that I've stayed true to what I originally believed in, about being independent, being utterly able to put what I want out, to never have someone say what I should be creating, and to ever have to compromise. When I first started doing music, my first ever album was 1985. Okay,
Wow.
that's my first album release.
Wow, fantastic.
And I did a couple of early albums back around that time, all self-released. And after the third album was a big step forward. I recorded on 8-track, not 4-track. I mean, I was recording on a 4-track cassette, 4-track, multi-track. I went on to an 8-track reel-to-reel machine. I mean,
so many options.
I thought, how am I going to fill this? How am I going to fill 8-track? So I recorded this album called The Farthest Shore, and it was the first time I actually sonically it sounded like what I could really hear in my head. It was the first time I really felt that's actually more like I think I know where I need to go. And I was very proud of the album, but I couldn't get any backing behind it. I wanted for it to go out further because I believed in it. And for the first time and the only time in my life, I was asked by a record company they'd heard the album and they wanted to talk to me. So I went in to see them, and they were at the time the biggest new age ambient label in the whole of the UK. And they sat down and said, well, we've listened to this album, we absolutely love it, it's just exactly what we're looking for. And I was already feeling really uncomfortable. And I was kind of like going, you know, I really don't know whether I should be here. And they said to me, okay, so first thing is this track here, this second track, we absolutely love this more than all the other tracks. We want a whole album that's more like that track. And I was like, but albums are just, I mean, their albums are albums. They're like, they're their whole story. And they said, no, we want it to sound like that. I was like,
big learning.
I said, I actually, honestly, to be honest with you, I actually don't think I can even do that. I don't think I can produce maybe whatever number of pieces of music exactly like that anyway. And then they said about the artwork. And they said, well, this is the artwork we're using. We always use this artist. This will be on your cover. And it was just awful. And I said, okay, well, I need to think about this. And then I went away, and for some reason, something happened in the company, and they phoned me literally about 3 weeks later, and they said, look, we realized that we're not going to be able to do any kind of deal with you because we've suddenly overstretched ourselves. We don't have the money for the new releases and stuff. But if we can put you on hold, and I was wavering because I was going, is this the only way to get my work out? Do I have to do this? You know? But they answered it for me. I was saved by them. Going, actually, we actually don't want you. And I was like, and at the time, I remember saying to my friend, and my friends were all going, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Nigel, that you didn't get the deal. I'm so sorry. You know, you lost this." And I sat there for a while, and I suddenly went, "Oh my God, I'm free." My next album can be what I want it to be, with my cover on, with my. So I think that, you know, we're talking about, you know, things that are pivotal. I think those things are, because I think they define then everything you do. And I'm really proud. I'm really proud that every person who's come to me as another musician struggling to get their work out there, I've tried to help them.
Mm.
I've tried to work with them. I've tried to give them all the information that I have, everything I know, everything
Mm.
I've learned. I will give them for nothing.
Yeah.
If it will help them in any possible way. And this was particularly true to begin with, because I started to get quite a bit of success and sell to lots of shops and to sell, abroad and to do things like this. And all of that contact information, all of those people, all those sort of things that
Mm.
record companies have closely guarded lists that they
Yeah,
never let
yeah.
go of, I gave to everybody I met who was a
Wow.
musician. And I'm
That's,
so glad I did it, because
yeah, yeah,
I totally believed that, it would not serve me.
yeah.
Why would
No,
I do that? Because
yeah,
people had shown
exactly.
me generosity. People had shown me generosity
Yeah, yeah.
in the past.
You got to pass it
You know,
down the line, don't you?
got to pass it on.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm really happy that I did those things, and
yeah,
I think that they kind of set the course, if you like,
yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
it would go.
Well, you've been an absolute inspiration to so many people, mate. And um, I hope, and I'm sure there's lots more wonderful music to come from both you and Carolyn. And mate, I'm just so honoured to have had a chat with you today, and I hope we can do it again sometime. I know um, there's
Please,
there's
absolutely, yeah.
there's a lot of aspects to your creative life that we haven't even touched on. So um, that's how busy
We
you've
haven't even
been.
got into the flute making workshops,
Yeah,
the all of the teaching things. Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely, but it's so lovely to share with you, my friend, because I know you understand, your understanding of all of this, and I'm sure everyone will. These are human things, aren't they, that we're talking about, and things we
yeah,
all
yeah,
want and
yeah.
need.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
lovely,
Yeah,
lovely to talk about them.
yeah, yeah. And thank you so much for your time. And where's the best place for people to find you and your music and all the different things that you do?
So the best place for people to go is for our website, because everything ultimately goes to there first and
Mm,
can sometimes feed out from there.
mm.
And that's seventhwavemusic.co.uk is our website.
Okay.
And we it's got lots of everything about everything we do is accessible on there. Stories, photographs of festivals, stories about travels around the world, live stream things, videos, all of that's on there.
And I know that there's a lot of stunning videos and films on your website as well. And I got totally lost in that in a wonderful way for hours last night. I must admit, it was yeah, just stunning videos, and it really gives people a fantastic idea of what you guys are all about. So I would urge anyone watching that is interested to learn more to soak those up as well. It's absolutely beautiful, and it
Thank
gives you
you.
an absolute feeling of why your creations are like they are. So
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of images of Dartmoor, and that ultimately is the most I can give people, is saying,
yeah,
that's what it is to me,
yeah,
that land,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, until our next discussion, I shall bid you farewell and thank you so much for having a chat with me today, mate. Until next
It's
time.
been yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been so lovely to make that connection again with you, and hopefully to everybody else out there. So thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thanks, Nigel. All the best, mate.